So hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss scalars and vectors. This is the third topic for our subject, General Physics 1. So to start with, we will first define what is a scalar. So scalar quantities are quantities that can be expressed completely by a single number with appropriate units. So in this case, these are quantities that only has magnitude and there is no direction in space. So no need na magkaroon ng direction. The examples of scalars are the length, temperature, time, volume, and mass. Now what about the vectors? These are quantities which require both magnitude and direction. So for vectors, matatawag natin na vectors yung isang measurement if it has direction. The examples are the displacement, velocity, acceleration, and force. Now, how do we represent a vector? A vector quantity can be represented by an arrow. Okay, so this arrow is called a vector. So we have three parts of a vector: the arrowhead, which indicates the direction, the length of the arrow, which indicates the magnitude, and then the tail, which represents the origin, kung saan nanggaling si vector. So in printed materials, a vector can be represented in a boldface or by placing an arrow over the symbol. So makita niyo dito sa picture, we have here vector D. So this is how we represent a vector. It is in boldface, tapos meron siyang arrow sa itaas. Tapos, in cases na kapag ginasulat lang siya, you can write it as is, as long as meron siyang arrow sa taas. No need na siya i-boldface. But if you are using computers or if you are going to type it, pwede siyang i-boldface and then merong arrow sa itaas. Now here, we will look at what is the difference of a scalar and a vector. So example natin, si distance and displacement. Okay. So now, we will first discuss what is a distance. So distance is the measurement of the total ground covered between start and end points and depends on the route taken. So in this case, we have a car. So we will measure the distance covered by the car. So in this case, your car moves 14 miles. Okay. We will assume na this is in miles. So 14 miles yung distance na na-travel or na-cover ni car. Okay. Now what about the displacement? Ano naman sa displacement? Okay. So in this case, it includes a distance and a direction. So ito si displacement. It's different from the distance. In this case, displacement is only 6 miles. Tapos, meron siyang direction which is north-east. So, this is our reference. This is the north. So, since it goes diagonal, that is north-east. Tapos, another definition of a displacement is it is the shortest path taken. Not necessary. The displacement is always the same with the distance. So, yun yung shortcut or yun yung pinakamalapit na distance ni car from its origin. So, yan yung tinatawag natin. Now here, we have the following quantities na naka-match siya if it is a scalar or a vector. Okay, so examples of scalar quantities, we have your time, mass, distance, temperature, and energy. So these are quantities that do not need direction. Okay. And then the vector naman, we have here displacement, friction, acceleration, weight, and velocity. So in this case, yung mga nakalagay dito sa vectors, these are quantities that needs direction. Okay? Para mas ma-interpret siya ng maayos. So kailangan meron siya direction. Okay? Now, important to reference frames when we are talking about vectors. So, since reference frames are used to show direction of vectors, it may also refer to a coordinate system or set of axes. Okay? And then it could also be observational reference frame tied to the state of motion of an observation. So for example, we have here the direction guide. Okay? This is very useful in determining the direction of your vector. It could be north, east, west, or south. Okay? Tapos meron din dito, we have here, and then we can also use the Cartesian coordinate plane. Okay, depending on the axis. So, si horizontal axis, we call it x-axis, and then si vertical axis, the y-axis. So, in this case naman, if we are using the Cartesian coordinate plane, we refer to the direction as the negative or the positive. Kapag negative siya, ibig sabihin, going to the west siya, or dito siya na side. And then kapag positive, doon naman siya kay east, going to the positive x-axis. Sa vertical naman, pag positive, dun siya papunta kay north or sa positive y-axis. And then, pag negative, papunta siyang south or downward. That's the negative axis or negative y-axis. So, it depends on your reference frame. So, always, i-refer natin parating at the origin or at your starting point. Dito talaga tayo mag-start. Now, what are parallel and orthogonal vectors? So, we have the following. Matatawag natin siyang parallel if they are going in the same direction. Tapos, the same axis sila. Both are, for example, this one, both are in horizontal direction and then they are going to the east. So, we call it parallel. Anti-parallel naman siya kapag opposite sila sa isa't isa. Okay. For example, here, vectors A and B are going away from each other. So it is anti-parallel. And then kapag mag-meet naman sila, that is also anti-parallel. And then we have here, it could also be that your vectors are equal to each other. Kapag naging equal sa vectors, ibig sabihin, parehas sila ng magnitude, parehas din sila ng direction. So we call it equal vectors. Orthogonal vectors, these are vectors that forms 90 degrees. Kapag i-combine niyo siya, magpo-form siya ng perpendicular na, magiging perpendicular yung dalawa ninyong arrows or yung dalawa ninyong vectors. So that is why we call it orthogonal vectors. As long as it forms 90 degree. Yeah. Okay. Now we have also operation with vectors. So vectors can be added or subtracted graphically and analytically. So in our next topic or in our next lesson, ipapakita ko sa inyo paano yung graphical interpretation or graphical addition and subtraction ni vectors and then the analytical addition and subtraction of the vectors. So here, vectors can also be added. And then we call this component vectors. So later on, I'll show you what are these component vectors. I-illustrate natin, ipapakita natin siya sa solving kung ano yung component vectors. And then kapag inad natin itong component vectors na ito, it results to resultant vector or resultant R. So dito sa illustration, makita niyo dito, itong f sub 1 and then f sub 2, ito yung tinatawag natin component vectors. And then, kapag inad natin ito siya together, makukuha natin si resultant R. So not necessary na i-add ninyo yung values na f1 and f2. This could not be added. Okay? So nagadepende yan siya doon sa form or doon sa directions ng dalawang vectors as to how you are going to add or subtract those vectors. And then the process of finding the effective value of a component vector in a given direction is called the resolution of vectors. So the process of adding vectors is what we call the resolution of vectors. Okay. Okay, so we have here a general rules in finding the resultant vectors. So merong tatlo. These are rules in addition and subtraction of vectors. For number one, vectors in the same direction are added and subtracted if they are in opposite direction. Kapag the same yung direction ng dalawang vectors, i-add natin sila. Bakit? Kasi both of them are going in the same direction. Okay, so tuloy-tuloy yung nata-travel ni vector. So in this case, we have here 12 plus 20 is equal to 32. And then yung direction ni 32 is the same with the direction of the two vectors. And then another one, 6 plus 10. In this case, si 6 is going south and then 10 is going north. So opposite yung direction nilang dalawa, so isa-subtract natin sila. That's 10 minus 6, it's 4. Tapos yung ipa-follow na direction ni 4 is kung ano yung direction ng vector na may mas malaking magnitude. Since in this case, mas malaki yung magnitude ni 10, tapos going upward siya or going north siya. So yung answer natin is 4 going north. And then for number 2, vectors acting in right angle with each other, we are going to use Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so in this case, kapag i-add natin si vector 10, which is going east, and then si vector 20, which is going south, we are going to use Pythagorean theorem. Ano ito si Pythagorean theorem? We have the c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Okay, so you just add 10 squared plus 20 squared, that's 500. And then square lang ninyo si 500, you will get 22.36. Ayan. So that's the Pythagorean theorem. And then another example we have here, 5, which is going to the west, and then 5, which is going to the north. So you do the same process, 5 squared plus 5 squared, that's 50. Square root of 50, you will get 7.07. So yun yung process ni Pythagorean theorem. So you can look it up sa Google kung ano yung formula ni Pythagorean theorem. I know you are all familiar with this theorem since junior high school pa ito siya na topic. Okay. And then for number 3, vectors acting at an angle, you can use the cosine law. So we already discussed how to use cosine and sine law depending on the given of the sides or angles na meron si triangle. Okay, so after this one or after this discussion, I will show you examples kung saan maa-apply natin itong general rules natin. Rule number 1, number 2, and number 3. Okay, so now let's have an example in finding the resultant vectors. Okay, so for the first one, a car first moves along a straight line with a displacement vector A of 275 meters due east. Then the car moves again in the same direction with a displacement vector B of 125 meters due east. What is the resultant vector R of the car? Okay, so we have here, ganito yung directions natin na ifa-follow. The news, call it the news, north, east, west, and south. Okay, since both of the vectors are going east, you can draw it this way. Ito si vector A, that's 275 meters, and then vector B, 125 meters. So basically, smaller scaling lang yung gagamitin natin para ma-illustrate natin yung problem. Okay. Now, what to do in order to find the resultant vector R? Okay, so since both are going to the same direction, you just add your vectors. Okay.
That's R A plus B. Okay, so you just add 275 meter east plus 125 meter east. Okay. Now the answer now is, your R now is 400, I think. 1275 plus 125. Okay, so that's 400 meters going to the east. Okay. So that's how you look for the resultant vector kapag si vectors are going in the same direction. Okay, now what about opposite direction sila? Paano kung si B going to the west? Okay, so ang mangyayari, this is now your vector A. I'm sorry, hindi pala makita. Okay. If this is now your vector A, tapos si vector B ninyo, pabalik. Okay, since it is due west, yan. Ang mangyayari naman, in solving your R, this will become now 275 meter going to the east plus 125 meter going to the west. Okay. So what will happen, since opposite direction, si 125, magiging negative siya or magiging minus yung sign niya. Okay, or negative yung sign niya. So this will become 275 meter minus 125 meter. Okay, so the answer now is 150 meter going to the east. Okay, bakit east? Since si east has a greater value. Mas malaki yung value ni God. So, ma-imagine niyan siya. Pag pumunta dito si A, tapos bumalik siya ng 125 meter, papunta pa rin siya sa east from your origin. So, ito na yun si 150 meter. This is now your resultant vector R. So just follow the direction of the given with a higher value. Okay. For the next example, a car first travels with a displacement vector A of 275 meters due east, and then with a displacement vector B of 125 meters due north. What is the resultant displacement vector R of the car? So in this case, the car moves in different directions na, and then not along the same axis. So magkaiba na yung axis ng direction ni car. So you write first your given. So vector A is 275 meter east, and then your vector B is 125 meter going to the north. Okay, so you try to illustrate first, or you try to draw the problem. Okay? So let's have here your Cartesian plane. Okay. So first si car, nag-move siya going to the east. This is your east. Let's say this is your vector A, and then nag-move agad siya going to the north, 125 meters. Okay. So this is B. Okay, now how to find for the resultant vector? So si resultant vector, that's from tail to head. Okay, so i-follow lang natin si tail to head. You just solve for the R. Okay? So how to solve for the R? You follow the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, what's your Pythagorean theorem? That's basically c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Diba yun si Pythagorean theorem? That's a squared plus b squared. This is for your right triangles given that CC is your hypotenuse, this is your A, this is your B. So this is the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem. So you can use Pythagorean theorem kapag yung problem ninyo, makakabuo siya ng right triangle. Okay, or meron siyang right angle. Okay. Now we can solve your R. R now by, okay, let's say this is R squared, A squared plus B squared. Okay. So, yung magnitude na lang muna yung gagamitin natin. Later on, for the direction, I'll show you how to solve for that one. Okay. So, let's say this is R, square root of A squared plus B squared. So, in this case, tinanggal ko na yung arrow sa top ng letters. It's because naka-scalar quantities na siya. Okay, hindi na siya naka-vector quantities. Since we will deal with the numbers. Okay, so later on na lang yung direction niya. Okay. So, your A is 275 meters squared plus 125 meters squared. And then, square root. Okay. Now, R is equivalent to, so input yan sa calculator, square root of, kita ba? Second slide. Square root of 275 squared plus 125 squared. So that's 300. That's 302.1 meters. Okay. Now what about the direction? Since we are looking for the resultant vector, si resultant vector is a vector, so that is why kailangan niya ng magnitude and direction. Since magnitude ko lang nakukuha natin, we will now solve for your direction. So si direction, hindi siya north, hindi rin siya east, since naka-diagonal siya. Okay, so in order for us to solve for the direction, we will get your angle. So let's say this is your angle theta. Si angle theta na yung i-consider natin na direction. Okay, so how to solve? You are given an opposite side, opposite ng theta or ng angle natin, and then an adjacent side. Okay, so we can use your tangent. Okay, so tan theta, opposite over adjacent. That's from your SOHCAHTOA. Okay. So, you now have tan theta is equal to, your opposite is B, and then your adjacent is A. Okay, so that's 125 over 275 meter, so makancel si meter. You will get 0.45. Okay? And then, inverse tan, 0.45. Okay, inverse. This is your inverse tan. Shift tan, and then 0.45. Okay, so you will have 24.23 degrees. So this is now your direction. Okay. So how to write your final answer? Okay. Your final answer now is pen. Okay. Your final answer now becomes R is 302.1 meters, 24.23 degrees. So that's how you write your final answer. Okay? So meron ng arrow si R kasi vector na siya. Meron na siyang direction. So you consider this as your direction. Okay, so for the next example, an insect crawls 18 feet in westward direction, then runs 20 feet, 37 degrees west of north. If the insect is approximately 34 feet from the point of origin, where is it located? Okay, so here you are given three displacement. Okay, so in this case, again, you have your Cartesian plane with directions north, east, south, and west. Okay, so first is si insect crawls 18 feet westward. So let's say this is 18 feet westward. Okay, so ito yung first natin na given. Okay, given. Let's call this A, vector A. That's 18 feet. And then runs 20 feet, 37 degrees west of north. Okay. So, west of north, let's say, meron tayo ditong another plane. This is your north. So, west of north, 37 degrees. So, let's say this is 37 degrees. That's 20 feet. Okay. Ayan. Sorry. This is now your vector B. Ito yung 20 degrees. I'm sorry, 37 degrees west of north. Dito yan siya. And then, if the insect is approximately 34 feet from the point of origin, where is it located? Okay, so from the point of origin, ito yung origin natin. Okay, dito galing si insect. Okay, since sabi, it is 34 feet from the point of origin. Okay, this is your 34 feet. Okay, basically, itong 34 feet is your resultant vector. Okay, ito na yung displacement ni, resultant displacement ni insect. Here, what we are trying to find is the location or yung angle ni insect from the origin. Kasi given naman yung distance niya from the origin, so we are going to look for your angle. Okay, so basically, ito yung hahanapin natin, your theta here. Okay, so what are we going to use? Given ang tatlong sides, okay, and then we are looking for an angle. So we can use here your law of cosine. Okay. Since I already gave you formulas for the law of cosine, you can just look for a formula na magmamatch siya dito sa given natin. So let's say this is your A. Let's call this your A, B, and then C. Okay. So we are going to use B squared is equal to A squared plus C squared minus 2AC cosine B. Okay, bakit ito yung napili ko na formula? It's because opposite ng angle na hinahanap natin is your vector B. Okay, which what we call itong small letter B. Okay. And then since we are looking for an angle, itra-transpose natin siya on the other side. Okay? Tapos, itong si B squared, ililipat din natin dito na side. Okay? So, how this will become, since this is negative, paglipat natin sa kabila, magiging positive siya. That's 2AC cosine B is equal to A squared plus C squared minus B squared. Since this is positive, pag ilipat ko siya dito sa right side, magiging negative siya. Okay, so that is now our formula. Okay, and then I will divide both sides by 2AC. Okay, para ma-cancel siya dito na side. Tapos, ilipat natin siya dito sa kabila. Okay, so this will cancel out. What will be left is cosine B is now equal to A squared plus C squared minus B squared over 2AC. Okay? Now, since we are looking for B, itong B, so i-inverse natin si cosine. This will become cosine inverse, okay, times A squared plus C squared minus B squared over 2AC. Okay. Now, we are going to substitute the values. Okay, itong nasa given natin na values kanina. We'll have 18 feet squared plus 34 feet squared minus 20 feet squared. Okay, divided by 2 times 18 feet times 34 feet. Okay. Okay, so if you solve this one, you will now have cosine inverse. This is equal to 0.8824. Okay, or you can just use 0.88. Okay, and then if you plug in this in your calculator, your cosine inverse, the answer now is 28.07. Okay. Now, since this is an angle, ang unit mo is degrees. Okay. So, this is now your answer. Okay. This is now the location of the insect from the origin. So, it could be B or your theta. Okay. This is also your theta. Okay. That's your angle. So, saan si 28.07 degrees? Ito yan siya. Okay. This is equivalent to 28.